Hello and welcome to MoloMolo African Tech Stories. I am Dr. Paulin Kantue, and together we will be talking about the fascinating stories of tech innovators and champions that are shaping the future of the African continent. Now, of course, this is our first episode, which is amazing, and I'm so excited to be able to bring this to the world, but more importantly, being part of my journey as I discover the different champions that are inspiring me or have inspired me throughout the years, but more importantly, the discovery of what it means to have technology in the beloved country in Africa in general. Now, of course, let's talk about why Molo Molo. What does that mean, right? Sounds like a funny word, but there is meaning and there is reason behind Molo Molo. Molo Molo means in some language means slowly, slowly, direct translation. It means to take things gradually. It also means if you are into the party scenes, when someone dances molo molo, it means, the aim is not to sweat. But it also means in the context of this podcast and what this podcast is trying to bring, it means a gradual, methodical, but purposeful way of dealing with technology and developing technological solutions for the African continent. Why is that? Because Africa is complex. Africa is not one country. Africa is multicultural, is, for example, where I come from, and we'll talk about me but later, is there's many languages, many dialects, incredible food, different types of music. And so when we talk about technology, it cannot be a broad brush. It has to be specific. It has to be East African technology potentially will not work in West Africa. North African technologies will most probably not work in Southern African technologies or environments. And that's the importance of Molo Molo. It's to discover the countries, the heroes of those countries, the context that those heroes really shone, but also thrived under. And that's what Molo Molo is all about. Understanding, taking the time, but also understanding the why these tech champions did what they did, what motivated them. Let's talk the story behind the story, but more importantly, let's understand how we can apply it in our own lives. That is Molo Molo. So I'm really excited to be able to bring this concept to for myself. Really, when I think about it, this is me. I tried to figure out what's next for me, what's next for my family, but more importantly, what's next for my friends and extended family. So a little bit about me. My name is, like I said, is Paulin Kantue. I am an aeronautical engineer by trade and an avid African technopreneur by passion. What does that mean? Uh, So I lived in South Africa most of my life, whereby I went to Wits, University of the Witwatersrand, where I basically got the trade and the passion of pursuing a degree in aeronautical engineering. And I was fortunate enough to fail. And the reason why failure is a fortune is I'll get to that a bit later. But I was not a brilliant student. I was someone who took for granted the first few years of my studies, what it meant to study, what it meant to achieve or to get an education, and I really took it for granted. So what did I do? I squandered it. I completely squandered it. I didn't really think about what it meant for my family to sacrifice, specifically my parents, what it meant for the people back in Cameroon, or others who didn't get a chance, like my cousins, to study in such a prestigious university, and I did squander. But I was fortunate enough that even though I I was at the brink of literally not having a future when I had to quit university, I got brought back and I took it under the mantle, decided to go for it and knuckle down. But mainly what happened there is through resilience and through the support that I needed and through church where I go to, I really shown be able to get to the point where I graduated. Not only graduated, but able to graduate enough to pursue a master's, which I did a couple of years later. So that's essentially the aeronautical engineering side in terms of studies. But then I decided through my master studies, I got a keen interest in drones, unmanned vehicles, and thereby I pursued a PhD much later in my career. I had a I've had quite broad experiences throughout various industries in South Africa, from helicopters to drones to missiles. And now, being in Germany, I'm proud employee of the Lilium and trying to make sure that the Lilium jet eventually gets to see its first flight and hopefully its first customers in the years to come. So that's the aeronautical engineer. Now, why African Technopreneur? Throughout that time, as I was going through my studies and learning what it meant to be an engineer, what it meant to provide a service to society, because that's essentially what an engineer does. I discovered that society required a bit more than just me going to work every day to work for someone else's agenda. I realized that there could be an opportunity to talk about how do I add more value to the people that need it the most. So 5 years ago, roughly, there was a small startup that started called UAV for Africa, and there was quite a bit of effort made in trying to shape the vision and mission of that startup. And essentially, it boils down to this: is it tries to be a company whereby fundamentally the focus is on building the skill sets of graduates and undergraduate engineering students through exposing them into real life or relevant projects that fundamentally could be commercializable for the purpose of an engaged or a low cost environment like the African environment, whereby drones could be capable of really bringing change to local communities. Now, that resonated to most students from Cape Town University to Wits, where I've gone, and that's still going on today. So that's one side of being a technopreneur that tries to bring change. Now, why is that important? Let's speak about that. It is important for one to figure out why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Again, who I am or who am I? I am a child of immigrants. Fundamentally, I've always been an immigrant all my life. Funny enough, I am 40 odd years old. I've always been an immigrant. Let that sit in for a while. I've always been an immigrant. My parents met in Italy, where I was born. They were immigrants. There's just the three of us. There was a period of time, so I might actually refrain from saying that, but I think I'm right by saying I've always been an immigrant. And the reason for this is we then, for the first 7 years, we were in Italy. Then we moved to Cameroon after one of my grandparents passed away. And then thereafter, I was in Cameroon for about 3, 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. But I was an immigrant because I didn't know the culture. The first 7 years, I was raised as a European, um, essentially, and moving to Cameroon for a short stint, not really knowing the language, not understanding the custom, I was a foreigner. And thereafter, when I was about 11 years old, then we uprooted again and moved to South Africa. And throughout that time, 2.5 decades roughly, I was an immigrant. South Africa is a very complex but beautiful country, many languages, many cultures, but I was still an immigrant. There is a famous name for immigrants, black immigrants specifically in South Africa, which I will not utter, but I was an immigrant. And I was fortunate enough in 2019, through a series of misfortunes, which I guess the next few episodes we will get into, I found myself in Germany. Again, an immigrant. Why is that? Why is this important? I think it's important for the sake of this podcast to understand or get context of why. Why are we doing what we're doing and what do we want to achieve through it? Being an immigrant is both a sad and tough life, but also it builds resilience, but it also brings an amazing view of the world. A view that basically says you have to be content with what you have, you have to be content with who you are, you have to find and strive and fight for for figuring out who you are, what is your identity, because your environment is consistently changing. And that is, in a way, has brought us to this point with MoloMolo, because it is about finding identity. It's about finding how tech can bring identity to an African child. How tech can bring purpose, can bring confidence, but also can bring better living standards for the families all around the continent. So it is quite important to for me to have sort of brought this up and really brought a certain level of understanding of who I am and how MoloMolo, in a sense, as a podcast, will try and tackle the few stories that will bring in the episodes to come. So now the podcast itself, what is it trying to do? It's trying to bridge a gap between the tech innovators, tech champions, some of them long gone, some of them currently trading, and the why. Why are they doing what they're doing? Not why have you started this business, but why do you believe this business is required? Why do you believe you are the person suited to bring this business forward, this technology forward, this research forward? And how did this why got shaped, got influenced? What was your childhood story that we can connect to the why that is represents you as a person? For me, why is so important because why is what sticks. Why is what stays. Why is what drives. Oftentimes, we want to talk about the how, the 5 steps, the 10 steps, the most important steps. But those are steps. You still gotta walk. And for you to walk, you must have figured out how to walk and why you should walk, more importantly. So, why is so important? Why is why you should get out of bed every morning? And why is so much more beyond your own comfort? As you will find out in the next few episodes, the why of some of the tech innovators and champions, man, it was big. It was big and it was relevant and it was deep. And that's what we need. The African continent requires men and women who have a strong why, but also a why that has been shaped slowly. MoloMolo, that has been shaped gradually but slowly so that it can have a staying factor in the various communities that it's trying to address. So that's essentially what the podcast is trying to achieve, and I just thought I should bring it up to everybody. So let's let's take a bit of a step back and trying to answer a few things that I believe are quite important as a first step. How does one answer the internal voice? How does one answer the internal voice? Or let's put it the other way. Do you know what your internal voice is? What bothers you, really bothers you, vexes you, wants to, you just want to shut out and just, what is, let's put it the other way. What is the one thing that if you sit in a cafeteria with your friends and that topic gets brought up, it boils you up as you share or speak about your experiences around that topic? Most probably, that is your voice reaching out and saying, talk about me. Talk about me, who I am, what brings me forward so that the real you can be brought forward. Now, how do you identify that it's not just a voice that exists in a void, but a voice that exists within context? Now, there are a couple of ways that I believe I found my voice, or at least I feel like I am at that point, to the point where I guess I'm starting a podcast. Here I am, full time job, husband, dad, you know, running a couple of businesses on the side. And here I am starting a podcast. The reason I believe the voice in my head, in my heart, has pushed me to this point, it's because it's the voice that says there needs to be more. There needs to be more said. There needs to be more that needs to be done. But more importantly, there needs to be more to be discussed around the issues of Africa in general, around the issues of how do we, as professionals, as researchers, as students, whoever you are that's watching the podcast, that you can bring forward. Everybody can bring that forward. And my voice, I believe, is about discussing it. It's about contextualizing it. It's about bringing it forward. It's about understanding what it means for me to be in the conversation. It may sound a bit wishy washy, but if I were to summarize what I'm trying to say, is your internal voice, or at least my internal voice, is the willingness and the resilience to keep on trying, bringing forward the conversation about a better Africa, irrespective of where I am, irrespective of the phase I'm in, irrespective of whether I have had a very good week or a very bad week. Bringing forward the conversation and reflecting on the various things that are happening around us that are affecting African continent is my internal voice. And I want to bring you to that journey. I want to bring you along. If you want to come along, come along. I will be excited for all of us to learn and to grow and yeah, and just to share. And I'll be really excited to get to know the different people who are watching this who feel the same way. And hopefully, this platform will be a good community that will bring about discussions on the internal voice that is grumbling about what can I do? What can I say? what type of things you cannot talk about, irrespective of whether it's polished or not. I mean, I'm not a speaker, I'm not a public speaker. Probably you've figured this out by now, but I want to speak. I want to speak. I want to talk about it. I am ready to talk about it. I believe I'm ready to be vulnerable enough to talk about it. That's, in my view, how you figure out what your internal voice is. The grumbling needs to get to a certain level that it forces you to go into a room, sit down, eyes closed, and contemplate of what makes you tick. Now, you might have heard, based on what I've shared, that I've had a few failures. I haven't shared all of them. Some of you who are listening, whether through a podcast or are watching this on YouTube, would know, if you know me, you would know that I've had a few failures. But the question is, how do you stay resilient? If you failed not once, not twice, not three times, but over and over and over, and sometimes the same failure, how do you stay resilient? How do you keep upbeat? How do you figure out that it's going to be okay? It's going to be better next time. Now, I don't have an answer, or at least I don't have the answer, should I say. But I have my answer. My answer in resilience, in working environment where I always have to prove who I am, irrespective of where I've worked, is the following. I think of my mother. I think of her. I think of what she's done. I think of how she's handled herself. I think of the people she continuously prays for and helps. I think of her love for her family. And more importantly, I think of her love for God. Now, why you might not have those positive experiences with your mother, but it might be someone else in your life or that you've befriended that has those types of characters that I've just spoke about. And why is that important in growing your resilience? Because resilience is often copied from someone else. Oftentimes it's a flow down. Resilience gets to flow down from other people if you allow it to. Resilience is not built within. This is not a self-help conversation. You're not going to help yourself be resilient, but you're going to help yourself thinking about someone else whose situations you are well aware of that has stayed resilient. Just let that sit in. It's quite important for us to always reflect on the people around us, what they've done. Sometimes even ask them questions. How have you handled this? How have you been able to achieve so much? Or more importantly, how have you been able to stay so positive through so much? That's resilience. In the midst of failure, failure will come. Failure will always come. But it's the resilience that allows us to ride the wave through the flow down from others who have been resilient and through others looking at you and your resilience. So, resilience is a community effort. It's an Ubuntu, as they call it. Some of you might know what that means. It's a community effort. As it says, an African child is raised through a village, not through just one mother and father. And I believe that's the same thing with resilience. Now, lastly, I thought I should also bring up this topic. How do you align your values with your work or your research? Why do I bring this up? You probably remember, as I spoke about earlier, that I've tried to have two parallel tracks. I try to be an aeronautical engineer, really pursue that, and to some extent be really successful at it. Here I am being brought here to first world Germany from Johannesburg to work on in my view, a world-class project in Lilium. But at the same time, keep a level head in understanding that work is not enough, that my values transcends beyond clocking in 9 to 5 on some projects that some guy had thought about that I had nothing to do with, albeit very interesting, but it's not my project. And more importantly, there's a lot more pressing issues and values to pursue outside my work. So, how do you align your work, your career, with the values that you hold dear? Let's take it a step back and make it a bit more tangible. How do you, if you had values around serving, i.e., you were part of an NGO and whatever it was, and you really served the blind or the sick or the deaf or the elderly, and you were part of the soup kitchen, and really that really drives you, but yet there's no way of you making money off that, so you took up I don't know, an advertising job or an engineering job or whatever the case may be, and yet the environment, or at least it seems like the environment, does not align with the values that drives you as you go to those activities on the weekend. How do you align those two? And the reason why you should align those two is because if you don't, you will eventually resent your work. Now, I'm not saying that it's always possible to align, but if you haven't tried, you wouldn't know. So, this is something that I thought I should bring it up because based on those two parallel tracks that I spoke about who I am, I had to figure out how do I align those two tracks, those two almost, in a way, completely opposed sides of me that that could potentially always be in conflict. So how do I align, or how do you align those values? One, at least from my perspective, is you've got to remember that you are working with human beings, should I say. Okay, well, some of you might be working just with robots, or you might be working from home. Yeah, I'm sure you're speaking to someone. Your salary must be coming from someone, and that someone most probably is not a human, or is a human, sorry. I was about to say it's not AI, it's a human being. So there is some interactions there. What do I mean by that? That you are working with a human being. Human beings fundamentally have something that they always care about. Everybody. Now, if your value is all about serving, there is something that human being that you're interacting with needs that you can serve them. Now you may be thinking, huh? I'm not in a business of serving people at work. I mean, they should be serving me. I'm manager of this and entrepreneur of that and so forth. No, everybody needs to be served and everybody needs to serve and everybody needs to feel like they're getting served. And that's quite important to think about it. Now, why do we believe that it's beyond the scope of your work to serve someone? That's mainly your ego. But remember, the question was, how do you align your values at work? If they're not already aligned, how do you do that? And one way is to really make a decision on being different. Being different with the individuals at work. At work, take pride in speaking about being African. At work, I take pride in bringing up the story that during my job interview at Lilium, or coming, my job interview for coming to Lilium, I was that particular point in time, I was in Cameroon. More importantly, I was at my father's village, or my village, I should say, in Banjul, Toba, Banjul, and yeah, I got the call from the HR person calling me up, and the phone rang, and or at least the interview date when it came about, not that I didn't know, but the environment was not conducive. So I had my first interview literally surrounded by chickens, or at least not necessarily surrounded, but it was pretty obvious that the chickens were nearby. The hens and the chicks, and the rooster was l- really, really loud. And that's something that I thought, why am I saying the story? Because me being proud of where I come from is the values that I hold dear. And me being unapologetic at work or around the people that I work with is also a way of aligning my values in the environment that I'm in. So I'm going to leave it like that. There's many, many more examples, but I just thought I should keep it that way. So, having said that, I think you're getting a taste of what MoloMolo African Tech Stories will be all about. Um, wow, we've reached almost half an hour, I think, 30 minutes of this podcast, the very first one, and I'm really excited. Thank you so much for listening to MoloMolo Tech Stories, a podcast where we discover and uncover the lives, incredible lives of tech champions and innovators that are shaping the African continent. I am Dr. Paulin Kantue. Thank you for coming. Please subscribe to wherever you're watching this, and I'll see you on the next one.